How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Agave and Cactus Talk. Today we're going to be talking about this really cool article I read on cactus farming. And I wanted to get in another podcast about cactus because I've been talking about agave a lot lately. And while I do talk about agave a lot, cactus is loved by me just as much. And I probably have more cactus species in, just my farm and greenhouses than I do agave. I have more cactus, you could say, than agave at the moment. And that's not done on purpose. The kind of thing that happened there is just a lot of my farm is recycled plants. So a lot of these recycled plants came from gardens all over LA County and came from, some farms all over California. So whenever I had to remove plants, instead of taking them to the dump, I would bring anything to the farm. And I gave a lot of species chances on the agave and cactus front, and lots of different arid plants that I brought from gardens and landscapes that I demoed. A lot of the times, I knew that they weren't cold hardy, but I would bring them over here to just test, because I was like, well, I got to take them to the dump anyways, so I'm going to have to pay to dispose of them. Or I could just put them on my farm, and if they die, they die, but I learn, right, or I experiment. So a lot of Dacylarion, a lot of Yucca, a lot of different agave, cactus, and different arid plants that I brought over. Made it, and a lot died. Probably half and half, because LA is an area where it doesn't really get under 40, Fahrenheit, and maybe some of the mountain regions you might get lower. I'm here in northeast LA County in basically eastern Lancaster, a little suburb called High Vista, which is pretty remote. And over here, it gets down to 14 Fahrenheit, and we get a little bit of snow. So a lot of the stuff that I bring from LA ends up dying here. But there is a small percentage, and this is why I'm kind of bringing this up, that makes it. And those plants end up being really cool to see because, for instance, it'll say, oh, it's a cold hardiness of only 30 Fahrenheit. And then I bring it here, and nobody's really tested it, around. And then I bring it here, and it'll probably live to like sometimes 20 or 25. And, I can play with shade tarps and make certain plants live and put them in greenhouses and make other plants for sure live. So the plant game is kind of shifted now, because before a lot of the plants would die if I just put them out into the cold. But now if I see they're going to die, I'll just put them out in the greenhouse, right? Like usually they don't die off the first snow or cold or whatever, right? It's like repeated days of that'll kill it. So then if I see it's not going to handle anything in the farm, I'll put it into an indoor greenhouse or shade house or something like that, and I can still propagate those plants for hybridization, still propagate them for seed, and even though I have small amounts of them, they're still advantageous to have around, right? So now I'm not just bringing plants to die anymore, but before I didn't really have anything besides the farm. I didn't have greenhouses and stuff, right? But where was I going with this whole thing? A lot of the plants that I brought here is just recycled stuff, right? And I wanted to do that on purpose because, one, I would save money for my landscaping company, but two, I would try a whole bunch of different species and I could double down on stuff, right? So then, for instance, if I brought a Dacylarion or a Hespero Yucca or a Yucca or an agave or a cactus or whatever, Fukurea, and it ended up being able to be dry farmed. I give an example, like I brought a Mexican saguaro, right, which is it's Pringly, but I forget what the first name on it is. But anyways, it's a little, cactus that produces fruit. And this little cactus can grow into a giant saguaro, much like the stuff you see here in Arizona. And those giant saguaros, for instance, as well in Arizona, were used by the natives to make, all types of different products with the fruit. They ate them a whole bunch and stuff, right? So my whole thing was, okay, I know this Mexican saguaro is cold hardy now because I brought it here from the farms in LA, and then it's done well, right? It's producing fruit, being dry farmed, living off just the rain. So I know that, for instance, now I can buy 1,000 of them, and then they can be dry farmed and be commercially farmed, right? So by experimenting and just bringing a few plants, I figured out a giant fucking list of shit that I can, times 1,000 on, not just double down, right? So another one of those might be Hespero Yucca Whippley, Yucca Gloriosa, all types of different stuff. I haven't had much luck with the Fucureas, so I pretty much just grow those in greenhouses, but I want to do some funky shit with that. I want to make a Fucurea times agave combo, because if Manfreda is able to cross hybrid with agave, I'm over here thinking, why couldn't you do that with Hespero Yucca or with Yucca or with Fucurea? So I'm trying to maybe combine Fucurea feltida, which produces a pretty large pinna, bulbs, bulbs, with Utaensis, which is the opposite, right? It's very small, doesn't give a big pinna, but it has good cold hardiness. And then at the same time, it could get maybe bulbs and pups from the Fucurea genetics, right? So trying to do some weird ass combos like that, see what happens. And hopefully that ends up panning out. But I kind of got off on a tangent here. What I was trying to just explain is that there's a lot of different stuff that could be farmed in a, that just isn't agave and cactus, and feel free to explore a lot of the different Agaveaceae family plant members, So getting back to what this topic was about, that I wanted to start this podcast. Basically, I read this crazy article, and I was like, wow, this is some, I need to talk about on the podcast. And the article is titled Namibia Pioneers were World's First Carbon Credits from Nepal Cactus Farming. Came out February 10, 2025 on thebrief.com, or the Brief News Network or whatever. And this is a really interesting article because, I'm putting it into perspective with all the different podcasts I've done, and, just talking about how, cactus farming is going all over the world. People are trying to farm this in different African countries, European countries, Latin American countries. Now, I'm farming it in the U.S., and I'm trying to get a whole bunch of different homies on cactus farming here. And, I got one farmer already with 100 acres of cactus. So, little by little, people are, adopting this all over the world, right? And I think that's good. But the reason for this podcast is to explain to people that it has to be done in the right way, or they're going to incur a lot of issues, right? So the reason I make a lot of these podcasts is to, not have people do agave or cactus farming my way. It's basically so that I can help people better their cactus and agave farms, right? Because even though they might have a lot of investment or a lot of know-how into these cactus farms, one thing I'm noticing a lot is the same errors, right? And if everyone is going through the same errors, that means there's a lack of consulting or, a lack of understanding of how these systems work, right? So let's get right into the article. So right off the bat in this article, they go into what their primary purpose is going to be, or this company's primary purpose is going to be. And the company I'm talking about is called Nopal Renewable Energy Corporation. Real interesting that an African company is using the word Nopal as a company name. But if you remember the Italian Cactus podcast, we got some Italian dude over there calling his company Wakanda. So apparently all these cactus farming names are, a little weird. Nopal Renewable Energy Corp is looking to create carbon credits by farming the Nopal cactus, right? And I thought this was a really interesting article because I've read a lot about carbon capture credits, and when I was in college, I studied a lot of environmental science and took a lot of those classes. And one of my favorite classes was environmental economics, because we actually studied carbon tax and carbon credits, and if you put a cost on carbon, what does that do for the free market for industry to try to prioritize low carbon or carbon less solutions to problems, right? So when I remember in this class, there was a lot of controversy about carbon tax, and there still is today. I went to college from 2011 to 2015 and went to UC Santa Barbara, which was a place where actually a lot of the environmental movement started. You know what I mean? First place to get recycling cans, one of the first oil spills in American history. So then it started a lot of the environmental movement in Santa Barbara that just spread fucking everywhere, which is a good thing. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that school is very good for environmental if you ever want to study environmental science. And I remember carbon credits, right, came up in this class quite a bit. And we would talk about the failure of a lot of these carbon credit projects because they couldn't reliably measure the carbon that was going into the soil, one, and then they couldn't reliably, find markets for their carbon credits. So this is two things that have been solved in the past decade. You can reliably measure the carbon that's going into your soil now, lots of different probe systems and ways to analyze that. And now there's actually billions of dollars of a market that people are buying carbon credits. So I'll give an example here. In California, we have carbon credits, and actually there's carbon credits all over the world in different ways, but California is one of the systems that's more close to me because I live here, obviously, so I'll try to explain how it is worked here, right? Kind of based on my remembrance of college, because it might have changed a little bit, but for the most part, this is kind of how it works. In California, we have a cap and trade carbon program, which means that every company is assigned a certain amount of carbon credits, which is essentially carbon that they can, pollute into the atmosphere, right? So if you're a company that, for instance, like say Tesla, that doesn't create a lot of carbon, going into the atmosphere through pollution versus say a company, like an oil company or somebody that's, or a natural gas company, Tesla can sell these carbon credits that are very expensive now, actually, to different companies so that they can continue to pollute, right? So overall, the system every year has less of those credits. The credits go up in price, and people are incentivized to pollute less. And then the people that, for instance, cut back a lot of their pollution can sell credits, so they're also incentivized in that way, right? So why is that really relevant to this? Well, if these guys are trying to sell carbon credits, as I mentioned, they've already solved in the past decade their two biggest issues, right? So there's billions of dollars of carbon credits around the world that people are looking to buy. Companies that are big polluters are looking to buy these credits so that they can continue doing business as usual. And it gets more and more expensive every year, ideally, right, in a good system. So that's a program I actually agree with a lot, even though I really, really hate government and, a lot of government regulation. But in some cases, it can prioritize good entrepreneurship and good company formations. And I think in this case, it's, forcing a company like, Nepal Renewable Energy Corp to get into the space, which I think is great. I hope one of those fucking company executives from that company hears my podcast, because I'd love to work with them and make sure that their system is successful versus what I'm going to get into in this podcast, right? Because I think I don't think it's going to be very successful the way that they're planning it out, to be honest with you. But I'll get into that in a little bit. I just always going off on tangents, but I think a lot of this shit is important to the background or the knowledge of trying to understand a lot of this stuff, right? Because the articles, I always say this, but this article is like a little 3-minute read, and I'll turn it into like an hour podcast. But to understand that 3-minute read, you need to know the history and the background knowledge and the context, right? The hour-long podcast, which I'm telling you. So I think it's valuable to put a lot of these articles into context in the best way that I can. So, again, back to the article. Right off the bat, the first image that you see in the article is an image of a monoculture of Opuntia ficus indica, right? Which to me, kind of sketchy, to be honest with you. I have described how Italy is going to go through a bunch of issues with Opuntia ficus indica monoculture. I did a whole podcast on how Tunisia is losing 10 to 30% of its crop every year due to cochineal, and how different plagues are destroying. I think if I remember correctly, they had like 1.3 million fucking acres of Opuntia ficus indica monoculture, and they were getting murked by these plagues, right? So right off the bat, I identified they're also using drip line. So it looks like the row is basically, to put this picture in your head, it's basically rows of Opuntia ficus indica, and then they have maybe 15 feet spacing in between the rows, but there's almost no spacing in between the plants. They're like literally rubbing up, touching against each other, which, in a monoculture is really bad, right? Because if one plant gets a plague, it's basically just going to fucking spread everywhere like wildfire, because all the plants are touching, and you have no natural barrier to prevent any diseases from spreading, right? So they don't have any ground cover that I can notice between these rows, right? And at the base of these cacti. Which, to me, being a vineyard consultant and agricultural consultant, farmer, I'm getting at is, I know a lot about farms in California and their pesticide use. I immediately assume, they're probably using chemicals. Because to maintain the dirt that clean, you need some form of maintenance, right? So I'm not going to just call them out, because I don't know. So I can't assume. I'm not like a lot of other people that just start to hate. So I'm trying to make them better. I'm not trying to hate. But it could be they're using hand tillage, right? They could be going in with hose, but around the cactus, right? But why I mentioned that it might be mechanical or chemical use is because in the middle of the rows, I doubt they're using hand labor, because I don't see any dips and stuff. It looks very level, right? So if you're using hose or hand labor or weed whackers, you'd see different levels in the terrain, right? So it looks to me like they're either going in there with a tractor and mechanically removing all the weeds, which is bad again, because if their goal is to have a permaculture of cactus, they're disrupting the soil ecosystem every few months by going in tillaging, right? So if their goal is to build carbon credits and to maximize the carbon capture, you would not want to disturb the soil. And then the same thing, if they're going in with chemical use and they're trying to fucking make sure that this shit is a nice uniform look of cactus farm, they're affecting the soil microbiome. Because when you apply fungicides, pesticides, like for instance, maybe they for sure know, a little background, they invested 1.8 billion into this fucking project. You think they don't know about the Opuntia ficus indica failure in Tunisia that has a lot of plague? They do. So to me, I'm over here like they're probably also spraying maybe fungicides, which could be destroying a lot of the mycelium and beneficial bacteria in the soil that will lead to higher carbon capture, which is their stated goal. So yeah, it's just it's not looking good there. You know what I mean? For me, it's not looking good. The way that, just based off this picture, you could tell so much, right? Like it's huge issues for me right off the bat, right? Because how did they get this monoculture of Opuntia ficus indica, right? Did they remove all the natives, or did they buy debilitated farms? They mentioned they were going to go and look for the cheapest places in, how do you pronounce this? Namibia? Not sure how to pronounce it. Let me see on Google real quick, because I'm going to be pronouncing this various times, and I want to make sure I pronounce it right, because watch, some person in this African country is going to come and tell me, that's not how you pronounce my country name. So, let's see how Google says you pronounce it real quick, actually. Namibia. Alright, well, it's not too bad. So, in Namibia, they said that this company or this corporation said they're going to be looking for the cheapest land around this area, right? So, I think they're starting out in, let me get the city real quick. Boom, boom, boom. Man, I had it written down here somewhere, but always fucking going off on tangents, and then I have a lot of stuff written down, but well, I don't know how to okay, it's called a Malta Hohi. Definitely pronouncing that wrong. Especially because it has an O with those two little dots on the top. Don't know how to pronounce that. I'm not that cultured. I know Spanish, English, and a little Italian, but that's a, interesting name for sure. So they're in this one area of, Namibia, and they're trying to find the cheapest area to do this grand scale cactus farming, right? But once again, going back to this picture, they know about Tunisia. For sure, if they invested almost $2 billion fucking dollars, they know that this country is also going through this big plague. So why would they plant a monoculture, plants right up against each other, where one little plague can wildfire murk all their crop? Once again, not very intelligent in my opinion. They should have planted a polyculture of cactus, trees, shrubs, lots of different shit. And like I mentioned, it looks to me like they fucking probably pillaged a whole bunch of native trees and shrubbery and stuff, because there's no trees in this picture. There's no shrubs in this picture. There's no ground cover in this picture. There's nothing but a fucking monoculture of Opuntia ficus indica, which is going to lead to a lot of issues for them, okay? So yeah, it's crazy. It's like, why do I plant a bunch of different cactus species here, right? I gave an example. I brought a cultivar of Opuntia ficus indica, which there are a lot of different hybrids and cultivars because it's one of the most widely planted things in the world. And I brought one heavily infested with cochineal to the desert into my dry farm system. And I had another cultivar of Opuntia ficus indica next to it. It got cochineal. Both those cultivars died. Now, it didn't spread because I had a bunch of Texas prickly pear around it and a bunch of Opuntia ficanta, which is a California native. Both those have had a lot more resistance to cochineal than Opuntia ficus indica. So it didn't spread to the other Opuntia ficus indica that I had in my farm because I had a break. You get me? I had other native grasses, other native shrubs, other, I'm planting now trees. So I had USA native trees like the Palo Verde. So, I mean, ideally later I want to plant, California natives like the oaks and stuff. So it's like, I don't want this shit to spread. I want to have breaks in my cactus farm, right? And the way that they're doing it, I think it's going to probably end up pretty bad for them, to be honest. That's why, once again, I'm using this as an example so that you can learn and not try to do these cactus farms that these guys are replicating and messing up. And it's sad to me because if you're investing almost $2 billion into a project, you would, they obviously didn't do their research because they would have had my number. And, it's not like I hold anything against them or anything. I'm not hating on them or anything. The point I'm making there is that I don't think they did their research and brought in the consultants that were intelligent, that knew about permaculture and regenerative agriculture systems. And by not doing that, they set themselves up, I think, for failure. So, anyways, I also see drip line in this picture. The drip line scared me because I've abandoned using drip line. I just have them here actually for aesthetic shit. I don't even turn them on anymore. That's a whole other conversation podcast that I'll probably get into, why I'm shifting over to overhead spraying for watering instead of drip line. But for now, just know, I want to get this podcast being 5 hours, but the drip line worries me because cactus can be dry farmed, especially Opuntia ficus indica and fucking Namibia, right? Because they have a lot more rain than a lot of places dry farming it. Like me, I only have 2-3 inches of average rain a year, and if I can dry farm it, they could definitely fucking dry farm it over there because they have way more rain. So my issue with the drip line is, I think because they removed a lot of the native shrubbery, a lot of the native plants, or even whatever was there previous to the Opuntia, now they're dealing with the issue that it's not able to retain water in the soil, so they're having to water it. So my Opuntia, I can dry farm it because I leave the native grasses that serve as a ground cover, the native shrubs that shade them out a little bit. I'll plant trees to help them out, right? So the water stays in the soil when it hits the soil. They're having probably to drip line irrigate all the time because they have a shitty soil microbiome that isn't able to absorb or utilize that water. So, one thing I observed there. And where the fuck is that water coming from? Namibia doesn't have exactly the best water infrastructure in the world, or, have a ton of fresh water or a ton of, water's just not the best thing, right, in that country. And not to say they have bad water infrastructure, but if you're building a $1.8 billion cactus farm and you're using drip line, and they say they want to scale to up to maybe 20,000 acres, or 20,000 almost hectares, this is like 45,000 acres or something. So if they want to do this on a grand scale with drip line, that worries me because where is that water coming from in this country that probably doesn't have the best water resources for their people, right? Are they going to prioritize this mega farm's water resources over the local villages, over the local people, the local cities? That's a worry to me, right? So I think there's a lot of issues to be explored there for this company, right? Because they don't even have to use the drip line or the water resources that might be kind of coming from a controversial area if they dry farmed a permaculture polyculture system. So I think that's a huge error on their part, you know. Yeah, fucking. It frustrates me when I see how much investment going into a project that I believe is going to fail. But yeah, if they're also chemically maintaining, are they, you know, what do you call it, testing the groundwater? Because here's the thing, a lot of the groundwater could be tainted by pesticides and by fungicides and chemical uses. And, you know, how low is the water table there? Like here in the Mojave Desert, the water table, you know, for instance, could be hundreds of feet deep. So we don't have a lot of groundwater penetration from fertilizers and stuff because it has to cross, you know, hundreds of feet to get to that groundwater table. But in a place like LA or a place like Camarillo or a place like Napa, where the groundwater table is just, you know, a few dozen feet under the soil, then, you know, they have lots of contamination. The same in some of the most vulnerable places around California. Usually where they contaminate the most is where people complain the least because they don't have resources. You know, go watch that movie by, or the Aaron Brockovich movie if you want to actually see a cool story about California city that was getting marketed by a corporation and having their water tainted. This lawyer came out of nowhere, fucking fought for him and gave him good money. Anyways, sidetracked. Also, the drip line, you know, means that they're going to have to be watering more often, or not the drip line. Also, the monoculture means that they're going to have to be watering more often. I don't know if I mentioned that, versus a regular system, right? But yeah, I don't. Lots of issues here. So, I think the cochineal infestations that I'm mentioning, they possibly will destroy a lot of their potential carbon credit, or carbon capture. Sorry, I got a call. But what I was getting at is that a lot of the carbon credit or carbon capture potential of this farm will start to go away if they have a monoculture that starts to get plagues or diseases, and they're losing 10, 30, or even, you know, worse. Like 10 or 30% would be if they, you know, go through a similar case of Tunisia or Morocco. But it could potentially even be worse, right? And be something we haven't seen and wipe out their whole crop, right? Which would obviously not be capturing any carbon if the cactus doesn't survive, right? So, yeah, going back to the same point that in this picture, sorry I'm talking about this picture for so long, but, you know, it's important to learn from what they're showing you, right? So, going back to the point that no trees and shrubs is going to mean a huge amount of water that's having to go into these crops, or these cacti crops, and you're going to have a lot of evaporative losses and low carbon capture potential, which is their main goal. So I don't really understand, to be honest, who is heading this project, but I don't think that they're doing a very good job. So going back to the article, I mentioned it already, but they're talking about investing within the next few years $1.8 billion, that's American, 1.8 billion, in these, you know, for lack of description, cheap farmland in Namibia, right? And this is really crucial. One second here, I got a text. Let me just respond to this freaking text real quick. Kind of important, real quick. So yeah, getting back to Namibia. So they're planning to invest, like I said, almost $2 billion, which is a lot of money going into these cactus farms, right? So I do agree with their concept of theory, right? It's like, in theory, a dry farm full of multiple species, a polyculture of agave, cactus, or fucrea, or sotol, or dasylirion, or, hespero yucca, or, different types of leguminous trees, and, all of these in an ecosystem farm using, say, primarily Opuntia varieties of cactus, ideally would work. I think their theory is based on good premise. It's just the application portion here, getting back to their poor consultation and research. I think just on the application side, they're not doing it correctly, because if they did it how I just explained, they would have a huge amount of carbon capture. They would have a system that's a permaculture system that's constantly each year accelerating that carbon capture, and you would have, an ability to measure this carbon every single year being sequestrated more and more and more, and you get to sell more and more credits and make more and more money. So to have a monoculture of Opuntia ficus indica, you guys are probably bored to death of me telling you 1,000 times that Opuntia ficus indica monoculture is not it. It's a horrible system, and it works for a few years, and then they get marked, and then they're complaining and begging for government aid, and I don't want to go off on that tangent, but yeah, it never works out. Even in Mexico, where traditionally, this Opuntia ficus indica is from, because the native indigenous people in Mexico never had a monoculture of this shit. They farmed it for thousands of years in a polyculture system where they had milpa, they had the three sisters, they had, like the milpa might be, sugarcane and different grains like corn or, barley or wheat or whatever. And then, the three sisters was the squash, the beans, the corn growing together. You got the nitrogen fixation from the beans. You got the corn stalk growing to provide, a nice little stalk for all the beans to grow up. And, you got the squash as the ground cover. All these native systems obviously are examples of polyculture systems that were successful for thousands of years and maintained the soil. And then here comes along, the American style of farming and depletes the soil within decades, so that's not only an American thing, it's shifted to Mexico, and they're putting in monoculture of cactus and going against their own tradition and culture. Kind of BS, but it is what it is. Getting back to the article. So, by June 24 of this year, they had 500 hectares. So, if you remember correctly, let's do some quick math. 2.47 acres is 1 hectare. So 500 hectares, it's like 500 times 2.5 basically, which is so 1,200, 1,250 acres, right? So it says that they got this initial 1,200 acres, 1,250 acres or whatever, 500 hectares planted, and that it was signed off by the, the government of Namibia. And not only that, it was given environmental clearance by government, which to me is kind of fucking weird. Like, I don't know if somebody got bought off there, or like if they donate a bunch to different politicians, and I'm not accusing anyone of nothing, but I just find it weird that this massive scale billion-dollar mega farm of cactus is being, what do you call it, approved by any environmental agency as something that is improving the environment or the ecosystem. Whoever approved that, if they have an environmental degree or a researcher in environmental studies or science or whatever, they've basically gone against everything that they've learned by saying given this the stamp of approval of the country. You know what I mean? This would have been the time to have been like, yo, we got this $2 billion of investment coming in. Let's make sure they do it right. So not only are they successful and they expand and they make a whole bunch of money for the country and the corporation, because you need money for the world to go around, as much as, the hippies would love for people to not run on cash. But you need this money, right? So it's like, Namibia could have been like, all right, let's do this polyculture ecosystem farm of multi-species of stuff, and let's improve the soil and all this, and but they approved this farm in to give it the stamp of approval of saying it's environmentally sound, which I don't agree with. I studied environmental studies at UC Santa Barbara, and I definitely do not agree with this assessment, you know what I mean? Because who is approving a monoculture as beneficial to the environment? But whatever, let's get on to going on with a little bit of this article, right? So the company says they're getting their carbon credit certification under Certis, which is a Portuguese carbon credit company, which is a subsidiary of Kima, Kima, which is a certificator for carbon credits internationally around the world, right? So these are the two corporations or non-profits, not sure exactly what they are, but they're organizations that are going to be certifying the carbon removal and the carbon sequestration, right? Which is, once again, surprising to me that they're approving a system, right, how I've just explained, right? So how I was talking about earlier, the two big problems is they couldn't measure the carbon sequestration at first, and then they didn't have the markets for these credits to be sold globally, right? So why are these global credit companies going for the bottom of the barrel, bottom of the sea projects to certify? Because this is not a good project to certify. If I was buying carbon credit projects, this would be a questionable project, in my opinion, for my company to invest in, right? So that's just my personal opinion, but obviously they're going about it, so someone's going to buy the credits and someone's going to use this, obviously, for the corporation to be marketing and showing how they're saving the planet and shit. So it's important to talk about it. One groundbreaking thing that I do think they're doing is certifying this company as the first company that has a methodology for carbon removal, right? So they're showing a method of, okay, this carbon can be sequestrated by these cacti, it's going into the soil, X amount, and that X amount can be sold for Y amount of dollars as credits to different corporations or organizations around the world, which I think is a dope system, to be honest with you. I just, once again, going back to this point, I know I'm repeating it a lot, but I don't really agree with this farm and how they're managing their system. I wish that, I pray to God that they reach out to somebody like me or me to try to improve the system. But yeah, the methodology that they're doing to get the accreditation and stuff, I think it's a great start for cactus farms, right? Because say I come in here in California and I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to measure the carbon that my cactus is, sequestrating in these few acres, right? I get some cactus trees, some ground cover cactus, and I leave this field to never be harvested, anything but the fruit. All the paths just continue growing, boom, 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 growing. And then, they've provided a blueprint essentially for me now to sell carbon credits on different markets by measuring that carbon that my cactus is sequestrating from my farm. And, if I can show that I'm not going to be selling this cactus and just allowing it to be in a permaculture system, then I can potentially make good profit from that, right? So as a farmer, this is another way that I want you to explore to make income from your farm. Look at how you can maybe potentially apply for carbon sequestration credit programs, how you can sell these credits to different corporations and stuff, and investigate that with a lawyer or different consultants to see how that type of program might work for your small farm or large farm or whatever, right? Because I always tell people that it's like in Guatemala, I give an example. A lot of my family owns land in Guatemala as well as Mexico and the U.S. So in Guatemala, they actually pay you in certain areas not to develop the land. So they'll give you money to be like, don't clear this shit, don't develop it, don't build houses, don't make a farm, don't do nothing. They just give you money to sit on this land and let it be a natural ecosystem, which I think is dope. If there could be a similar system in the U.S. for instance, build this permaculture, polyculture, ecosystem farm over here that sequestrates carbon, and we're going to pay you for that. That is a great model that could help small farmers, large farmers, medium farmers, all farmers, in my opinion, right? No matter where they are in the United States. So, once again, I'm not a huge fan of the government, but these are types of systems that could be helping farmers a lot, right? Like these California cap and trade carbon credit system programs, and the methodology that this company is working on. Nopal Renewable Energy Corporation in in Namibia, I think, is a great start to this thing that hopefully will spread around the world, right? It basically just sets a standard, and I think this is great, right? So even though I think their monoculture will do poorly, I think this is great for future cactus dry farmers, right? So they could grow cactus for credits. So going back to this article, they said, lots of, cactus farms in the past that would sell credits were not successful because they were selling the cactus, right? So if the cactus, for instance, is sequestrating carbon, like say I have a bunch of small little 1-2 foot cactus, that's not going to sequestrate as much carbon as a cactus tree that's 10, 20 foot tall, throwing out 1,000 pads a year, right? So, and then if you're getting rid of that cactus, cutting it down, selling it for pads, obviously your carbon sequestration is not only going to go down, but potentially could even be negative, because say you're putting in a bunch of carbon into the ground, but now you're coming in with big diesel trucks, big machinery, a lot of laborers that are driving there, and then you're having to harvest these pads and sell them. I would be interested in seeing what the carbon, equation is there, because I would even bet that they're going neutral or they're going into the negative of carbon there, right? And that's what they're talking about in this article, that why these other past farms were unsuccessful, right? And I agree with them. It's better to keep it in a permaculture, polyculture, ecosystem farm system. Where I am a little confused with this article is that the whole article, they're talking about how, once again, these past cactus farms were unsuccessful to selling carbon credits and sequestration, because they started selling the cactus, right? So they say, oh, we're not going to do that. We're fucking only going to keep it permaculture and sell the carbon credits. Well, then out of nowhere, they throw at you that they're going to maybe potentially do bioenergy, and they want to make Namibia a energy leader or a bioenergy leader in this space of cactus. Which, I mean, we've talked about how cactus could potentially be a big biofuel and energy source for the world, because you're able to grow it on relatively low water in lots of different arid landscapes, right? So it could help in lots of energy portfolios around the world. But, I don't quite understand how they will be able to do the bioenergy plus the carbon sequestration thing, right? unless they figured out some equation I haven't thought about here yet, where the biofuel is like making them carbon, negative, right? I'm not sure how that would work, but, keeping an open mind, don't like to judge the company before I know all the facts, because this is just an article, right? But trying to also think about all the stuff they're saying, because a lot of companies like to be sneaky and sneak the little things in there like that, right? So I think it would be smart for them to just keep the farm exclusive for credits. That's kind of the summary of that, right? But they're aiming to sell hundreds of thousands of carbon credits. They say within the next few years they want to sell up to, that they could potentially work with even one company to sell 500,000 carbon credits, right? And they say that, they potentially could work to sell millions of carbon credits, right? Which, the thing that they don't mention here, which I'm really interested in, is how much are each of these carbon credits going to be sold on the market for, right? And where are they selling it? Because, like I said, they're working internationally and with a Portugal certification company, so it doesn't look like they're going to sell them to USA companies. They might, but yeah, I'm interested in where exactly these carbon credits are going to be sold, because I think small farmers, medium, large farmers that maybe potentially want to get into cactus, if they have an ability to measure, what the carbon that their cactus farm or different arid landscape farm is sequestrating, and they know the value of these carbon credits on the general international or American markets, then that means they can plan to sell these credits, right? They could work with a lawyer to legally make these credits, measure these credits, and sell them into different markets, right? So that's where it can get real interesting, right? Because obviously if they're investing $1.8 billion into this, they see this as an extremely profitable enterprise. I don't think while I'm criticizing their farm, I don't think that they're noobs. I don't think anybody invests $1.8 billion into a farming project without at least realizing some research. Like, this shit might actually work for them, right? And I've explained the ways that it might work for them by using different chemicals, by using different tillage, by using all these different things that might make them a low margin or profitable for many decades or years or stuff. But one little hiccup, like a plague or all types of stuff that I've described, can destroy their farm, right? But I don't think that they did all their calculations, is my point. My point here is, I don't think they did all these fucking investments without doing a large amount of calculations on seeing how this shit will be profitable, right? So if they're saying their main source of profit is going to come from carbon credit sales, this is very interesting, right? So, yeah, as I mentioned, this farm taking this big investment, opening this market up for different types of cactus farms is going to be really beneficial for, the global cactus trade, right? I'm telling you, there's millions of acres in Africa, right? I think Tunisia's got like 1.2, 1.3 million acres of cactus, like over 10% of their agricultural land is cactus. You got Morocco, you got lots of different African nations, you got Brazil, Mexico. It's grown in 24, maybe 3 different countries around the world in a very commercial basis, right? Like Italy's already got hundreds of acres on, in cultivation. Probably going to get way more, how I've talked about in the podcast, right? Because they got tons of grape monoculture and olive tree monoculture going to shit through plagues and a whole bunch of factors on the wine side. But yeah, they're just getting murked left and right? So one thing they talk about in this article is that the cacti have to be a certain size for sequestration. That's something I was talking about earlier, right? Like, it's kind of confusing me, some of the shit they're saying and some of the stuff they're doing, right? Through the pictures that I'm seeing, right? Because it's like they say, okay, yeah, we have to have large cacti to have better sequestration. You have to have all their cacti planted right next to each other with very little space to develop, and they're like 1-2 feet high. When I can give you an example of tons of cactus tree here that are native Opuntias to California or to USA and Mexico that can get 10, 20, 30 feet tall, and just like a tree sequestrate tons and tons of carbon. A little baby ass fucking cactus is not going to sequestrate shit because it doesn't have any fucking roots. You know what I mean? You're comparing a couple inches of roots to a cactus tree that might have feet of roots. Okay? And obviously, how we talked about in past podcasts, a lot of the stuff that people attribute to plants, like carbon sequestration and stuff, it's not such a black and white relationship. The soil microbiome has a lot to do with the soil sequestration, right? So if you have a really unhealthy soil microbiome, you might not even have any soil sequestration if you're having these plants not develop correctly or the soil microbiome not develop correctly, right? So if they're spraying tons of chemicals or disturbing the soil or keeping the plants low, it's not going to work out for them, man. You know, you need these roots to establish these tree forms of cactus, right? Opuntia indica, you know, when I go to Guanajuato or Jalisco and I go into the cerro, right? How I always talk about you know, it's like the chaparral, the forest or whatever, the mountains. Fucking, you got 30, 40 feet fucking Opuntia indica that's hybridizing with fucking everything in the fucking forest, man. And these shits are gigantic, full of fruit. People are harvesting them with little fucking pole rods and, you know, hundreds of pad production off fucking dry farming, right? Like, just off the rain, the shit is super productive, and people are in cactus farm systems having, you know, these little baby cactus that they're fertilizing all the time, that they're cutting in a bunch of whole, you know, pruning in a bunch of weird ass ways, supposedly to get more production. It's like nature already figured it out, man. I don't know what the fuck is up with this whole like little baby cactus monoculture thing, but keeping the plants super low is not gonna help them out. The close spacing, also another thing, not gonna allow them to develop. Plagues might spread super quick. It's not smart, man. The only thing you get with the plants being that close together would be added potential to keep the water in between the roots between those plants, but because they're the same plant, once again, it's kind of lame. Like, if they had a couple trees or a bunch of different grasses or shrubs and stuff, then, you know, the extra water would be shared among this little, you know, microclimate, right? And not just among the cacti. So, I don't know. The close spacing is another thing I have real issues with, to be honest. But yeah, this whole article just has given a lot of really good info. You know, they're going from 500, you know, hectares. This company, once again, its name is Nopal Renewable Energy Corporation. They're trying to go from 500 hectares, which I mentioned again is 1,250 acres, more or less, to 5,000 within the next few years, and then by 2027, they want to get up to 5,000 hectares, right? I think I repeated myself there, but yeah, by 2027, 5,000 hectares. 2028, they want to get up to 17.5 thousand hectares, which, to do the conversion, you know what I mean, it's like basically 2027 they want 12,500 acres, and 2028 they want, let's do the math right here, my friend, on the iPhone, because it's 2 in the morning and I'm tired as fuck after working all day. I'm doing this podcast actually as, you know, I'm potting up some baby agave marginata into little 4-inch and 1-gallon pots. So if you need any of those in a few months, rooted, let me know. If you need bulbs, let me know. But yeah, so 17,500 hectares times 2.47 43,225 acres. So almost 44,000 acres is what they want to have in the ground of cactus by 2028. This is a fuck ton of cactus. Let's go back, it's always good to put stuff in perspective. There's around 600,000 to 800,000 acres of grapes. So there's around like 600,000 of wine grape and like say like 150 of like table grape. The wine grapes probably dropped by like anywhere from 25 to 50,000 acres this year, which is a great thing for the wine industry. But let's just call it, for this example, 600,000 acres wine grapes, right, in California. So it's the number one crop planted in California, which is the number one state for agriculture in the United States in terms of revenue and in terms of probably fucking everything. But let's, not start huge debates here. But California all the way. So in terms of revenue, we're killing everyone else. But like people always tell me, oh, Kansas is fucking huge or whatever. We produce like billions of corn. Let's put this in perspective. Kern County, one county in California, which sure is the most productive in terms of revenue, or even choose Fresno, they're $40-50 billion plus. I mean, it's bigger than the whole fucking state of Kansas's agriculture, probably. Someone Google it. But so yeah, just put in perspective how much of a fucking powerhouse California is. Like over 90% of the fruit and nut and like over maybe, I don't know if it's 50 or 70% of the veg is grown for the United States in California, and like all types of bunch of specialty crops, and we're just a powerhouse. But going back to my point, I was getting sidetracked here. So if they're planning to get almost 44,000 acres in the ground, how much is 44,000 acres divided by, say, 600,000? That's about 7% of the whole California wine grape. So within the next 3 years, they want to basically put a 12th of the whole California wine grape acreage cultivated to cactus farming in Namibia, which is a staggering amount of plantage that they want to do relatively quickly. Which, fuck. It's always raising red flags to me. Because whenever you want to do something so quickly, and you want to do it at all costs, like they have all the money in the world here, they're going to start cutting corners. And where they're going to start cutting corners probably is going to be by using chemicals and using low labor, using, labor that, I'm not the biggest fan of unions, but labor that doesn't have representation like unions. Labor that maybe, is very low paid. So they're in Namibia, right? And it's like, they're already talking about this shit in the article. They're talking about how, they started in this place I couldn't pronounce, which is Maltahoe, Namibia, right? And they said, oh, okay, this is where we started, but we're trying to actually look around here and see where the cheapest land is, where the cheapest labor is, where the, they didn't say it, but in my head, they were going down to the little baby list, and I was like, where the cheapest regulation is, where the fucking easiest politicians to buy is, because that's how it works, man. There's an interesting thing, I don't really like to get too much into politics, but it's like, around the world, corruption is kind of like hidden behind back doors, you know what I mean? But in America, you just donate to whoever you want, and then they now have you, now they listen to you, and they want to pass legislation, so they keep getting money for their campaigns from you, right? So, in America, corruption isn't behind back doors. It's literally like in front of your eyes. Like they're like, this is what we do. You know what I mean? After Citizens United, it's completely legal. You could be out in the open just donating to whoever you want as much as you want. Before it wasn't like that. It had to do with corruption behind the scenes like in Mexico and shit. But the point being here, when they started saying, yeah, we're going to find the low land, the low labor, the lowest transportation, I started thinking like billion-dollar company looking for all these shortcuts. Like they're probably looking for the places where they can influence the politicians easiest, the environmental regulators easiest. You get me? Like they tell you one thing, but they also, by telling you that, tell you another thing kind of behind the back. And once again, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but even if I was a billion-dollar company, this is what I would be doing, right? And not to say I'd be trying to destroy the environment and shit, right? But this is what they do. Like if I was running a billion-dollar company, I would probably try to do a lot of this differently, how I've been explaining through this podcast. But say they weren't working with me, you go fund some politicians and stuff, and, stuff moves along much smoother. In Mexico, I always tell people it's like when a lot of paperwork isn't moving through in whatever organization in Mexico, money is like lubricant. Let's put it that way, and, that's how it is around a lot of the world. Sorry to get off on that tangent, but, you can disagree if you want, but that's what I've seen, being in multiple countries, working with lots of different agriculturalists. Everyone tells me it's like, you gotta have money to play the game. But, it sucks for small farmers, but it is what it is. Going back to the article, they're trying to expand super quickly. It's kind of a lot of issues with that. This shit that surprised me the most is they said they were importing all their Opuntia ficus indica from Portugal, which, going back to their getting that Certis organization and certified in Portugal. But it's like, dude, the whole African continent is full of Opuntia ficus indica. Why the fuck are you importing this shit from Portugal, having to go from Portugal through the European Union, across the Mediterranean Sea, across North Africa, into fucking Namibia? This shit is like, I don't know who the fuck is the logistics guy that got the contract here that's like the family member that, or whatever the fuck, right? It's like, but that was not in their best logistic decision there, because they could have went to Morocco. They could have went to Tunisia and said, I want some non-plagued, get this shit laboratory tested, Opuntia ficus indica, and bring it over to me. It would have been way cheaper logistically. You know how they talked about they want the cheapest transportation cost. You telling me it's cheaper to transport this shit from Portugal than it is from Morocco or Tunisia? No way. Somebody got a contract there. That's the sad reality, but it's like, I don't know why the hell they're importing it from Portugal. And who the hell in Portugal has thousands, tens of thousands of acres worth of cactus pads readily available for this company to buy? That was even more surprising to me, because I'm like, who the fuck is farming cactus in Portugal that I don't fucking know about? That I'm about to do some scooping. You already know me, man. If that's you, by the way, I saw there's like 3 people in Portugal listening to this podcast. If that's fucking you, man, let me know, because I would love to visit Portugal, and we'll do a little crossover cactus farm, podcast, whatever. But going back on track, I don't know why they're ordering it from Portugal. It sounds kind of stupid to me, to be honest with you. But let's not be mean. Maybe they got this shit at a super fire deal and they're fucking the guy in Portugal, and the guys in Portugal are losing money. Who knows what the deal is, right? Because that's how a lot of these companies sometimes may work. They give like, these gigantic, there's one thing you gotta watch out for as a small farmer. I've fallen into the trap. Big companies will give you a big contract. You see the big number. It's like you're a rapper being signed to a record label. You see the big number, you're like, oh, I'm about to get this 100,000. You're like, this 100,000, wow, cool. but you don't see the amount of money that's going to the amount of work. So then you got to do all this work, and when you do the calculation, you're like making below fucking sometimes even minimum wage or like super low wage, you know. But you just see the money, you know, at first, the little like up front, you're like, boom, boom, give me that money. So I don't know who they're fucking in Portugal, but that deal also doesn't sound like it's. I don't know how they're getting it so cheap, right? So questions. So once again, going back to the bioenergy thing, they say at the end of the article, they mention that again. I don't know what the fuck, how that's gonna work. You're trying to sequestrate carbon, but then you're also trying to do bioenergy. Not sure where they're going with that. Maybe they can like split the company in two and have the carbon credits and then do the bioenergy thing. That's most likely what they're trying to do. If like I'm thinking about it from an entrepreneur perspective as well, I'm trying to be like not so critical of them as well. I do think this is a great project. I just, you know, would like them to do a little bit better. But the point being that overall, I'm very happy they're doing what they're doing. I just, you know, want to show or teach everyone who listens to this podcast how they can do it better, right? So, I think that's pretty much the whole article. As I mentioned, it's like a 3-minute article. I'm over here doing an hour-long podcast on this. But it was a very interesting article that I was just reading it. I read it like 10 times. I was talking about it with different homies. And I was just like, this is blowing my mind. I need to put it onto a podcast, a bunch of these different points about what I'm thinking of this. And it's not the only article that I read that day. Like, I've got 3 different podcasts. This is the first one, or the third one. And the other 2 podcasts, I'm trying to remember right now because I recorded like 6 podcasts in one day. But 3 of them were on farming, actually, and sorry, what was I saying? So yeah, the other 2 podcasts on cactus that I recorded, one of them was a really interesting article that was talking about Punjabi farmers, so Indian farmers that are growing dragon fruit. Dragon fruit's also a cactus, if it wasn't obvious. But, you know, this is a really interesting thing because dragon fruit is grown in Southeast Asia and Vietnam, Cambodia, different areas. Fuck, I need to do a podcast on that, to be honest with you, because they just grow a monoculture of dragon fruit and they got like LED lighting. Whole bunch of bullshit, to be honest with you. Looking over here as a Mexican farmer, where dragon fruit is from Mexico. And then the next farmer, cactus farmer podcast, also in that little group of 3 here, was also on Indian cactus farmers, but this time we're going to be looking at how the Indian cactus farmers are building up biofuel refineries for agave for cactus, and how this is actually a booming, I wouldn't call it booming, but you know, it was this niche thing kind of like centered in like just like a few people's hands, and now it's kind of booming within this region. So they're making tons of cactus biofuels, and the government's getting involved and trying to fund a lot of these farmers and projects, and they think the shit could blow up. So I want to talk about that too, because not only can agave make biofuels and potentially energy products and be involved in energy portfolios for any country around the world, but so can cactus. And we're going to talk about how the Indian farmers are doing just that. So hopefully I can release those 2 other podcasts tomorrow and the next day. But for now, enjoy this one on, Namibia. Am I saying that right again? Yeah, Namibia. Cactus farmers, and you learned hopefully you learned a little bit today about cactus And if you got any topics about cactus that you want me to talk about, or like do research, or like just get on the podcast, let me know. I'm trying to look for different topics to try to teach as much as I can to all of you. I don't only just read the article, by the way. I try to do a lot of background information research, and a lot of the research, when I say research, is going to be peer-reviewed stuff. So, sometimes I might remember something a little bit incorrectly or stuff. You can always Google or ask me, and I'll try to pinpoint you to the research article. But, I got a pretty good photographic memory on a lot of stuff. And, I give an example, in my Namibia Cactus podcast, I was talking with Chris. And I told him there was actually an old tequila distillery pre-denomination that was in Texas. That was me being faded, just, remember incorrectly. It was actually a distillery that was in Arizona. And this Arizona distillery, let me see if I remember it correctly. Let me see if I could get the name of it really quick, because it was pretty interesting, I read this research article a long time ago talking about this, and it was kind of interesting because they presented this news article talking about how it was basically this dude. Trying to remember this shit correctly here. Let me just pull it up real quick on Google. Because I remember it was a senator, and he was from Arizona, but there's some crucial info about this dude. You lurk it up real quick. Always going on tangents, huh? But yeah, this guy's name was Harry J. Carnes. Carnes? My God, my speech teacher is gonna hate me. So Harry J. Carnes, he was a former Arizona senator and mayor of Nogales, a pretty big city in Arizona. He opened up a distillery in the 1930s, which started producing, what he called tequila. And this was pre-1974, where the denomination of tequila was created. And Mexican government started seeking to have this denomination of origin protected abroad. So, essentially, even before this happened, though, this guy had this distillery kind of fail, right? So, the distillery closed just a few years after production, I'm reading here. And, there's different museums. The Pimeria Alta Museum in Nogales has different photos of it. So you could go see the distillery and see the barrels of tequila, even the first ones that they produced at the distillery. They mention how in the 1930s, real interesting. I'm reading the history of this distillery, by the way. If you just Google Arizona Tequila Distillery 1930s, you'll start getting a lot of, research on it. One that I, recommend here is going to be, sorry, I got distracted. What was I talking about? So yeah, in the 1930s, they were talking about how, in the history of this little distillery in Nogales that produced tequila, they talked about how, aguardientes, non-agave sugar distillates, started destroying tequila because they were produced so cheaply, so that's why this shit shut down. Which, to be honest with you, is a pretty plausible, it's a pretty plausible reason for closing down, you know what I mean? It looks like aguardientes were just being produced so cheaply, and, they just got murked, so... the tale of many distilleries, they could not compete, and they got murked. But the point I was trying to make here, sorry for going off on an even longer tangent, as I always do, was that some of the stuff I may say is wrong. Don't assume that everything I say is, 100% correct on these facts. That's why I say don't quote me a bunch of times, but, I might be just a little bit off, or I might have one state off or whatever. Google it yourself, double check, you know what I mean? I'm not nobody's fucking parents to be, I don't know, a lot of people call me an agave expert, you know what I mean? But I never refer to myself as that. I research as much as I can, try to give the best information I can. If I'm wrong on some shit, don't hold it against me is the whole point here. But I'll try to come back in future podcasts and correct myself about this stuff, right? So the point that I was getting at earlier is just in all of these podcasts, I want to teach you the most I can, right? And do your own research, right? So the point I went off here that got me on this tangent is just that a lot of the research that I'm going to be telling you guys when I say, oh, it's something that's research, is peer-reviewed stuff. Well, a lot of the times if you reach out to me, I can give you the direct article that's coming out the University of Guadalajara or University of Arizona or University of California, whatever the fuck researcher. Most of the time, honestly, it's like 6 fucking researchers on one article. So I'll send you the article, the researchers that you can cite, and all these people to get the best information if something necessarily interests you more than other things. But going back to my even previous point that whatever you want me to talk about on agave or cactus, or you would like to know more about, these podcasts are available on YouTube. Drop a comment, and or in Apple Podcasts. I don't know how to look at the comments, honestly, on different platforms. Like, I'm on all platforms, but I gotta figure out a way to have all the comments from all the platforms on one fucking page, But YouTube is the one that I always look out for. So drop a comment on the YouTube podcast for this, and tell me what you want me to explore, or maybe research more, or talk about more in agave or cactus. And if there's a certain person you want me to bring on that's involved with the agave or cactus space, let me know. I'm trying to get on different types of people from different countries. So, I've actually only had 2 of the 17 podcasts that I've brought out so far be with other people. It's always usually just me talking to my fucking self for 2 hours or an hour or whatever, chilling here with the dogs. But trying to bring on different farmers from different areas, different spirit brands from different areas, different agave researchers, cactus researchers, people who have just a cactus farm or a cactus garden, or anyone that we could learn from that's going to relate back to agave and cactus is someone I want to have on this podcast. So if you have anyone like that fits that criteria, reach out to me. Farming and Gardening California on Instagram, Agavero Californiano on YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest. Reach out to me, drop me, their info, and I'll try to reach out to them, right? So, right now, I think this week I'm going to be putting on the podcast. I think I already confirmed with the person. I got to double check when the time is for that, but it should be maybe on, the middle of this week, maybe on a Wednesday or Thursday. And he's a rare agave cultivator, even cultivates some cactus in Mexico. He's close to where I was born, in Ahualuco. Actually, really, the first thing I fucking do when I go back to Mexico, I've been real busy moving all over California, but I'm going to go back to Mexico soon. And one of the first things I want to do when I go back to Ahualuco, which is where I'm born, right outside of Guadalajara, is to visit this homie's farm, because he's producing dozens of different agave species that traditionally were cultivated in Jalisco, around Mexico. He's shipping all over Mexico, shipping all over the state, shipping all over the world, kind of how I am, agave. And me and him always chatted up. I don't know if that combo will be in English or Spanish, but it will be a great combo. If it ends up being in Spanish, I will post the Spanish version, and then I will fucking try to do a voiceover or some type of edit second version where I do it in English so that people can understand what we're talking about, but I'll see what I do there. Yeah, just wanted to tell y'all about different stuff that I'm bringing to the podcast, right? I'm trying to get clearances from a couple different agave and cactus, yucca, different arid landscape farms that I'm working with. Consulting calls, I record them all always and send them to them. Because before I would just like, oh, they're paying me a bunch of money to just talk with me on the phone or whatever, right? So I would send them the convo so they could have all this info that we talked about and, you know, repeat it 100 times if they wanted, right? They have the file or whatever. And it's like, I want to start bringing some of those conversations, the consulting calls to you. Not even like I'm trying to sell more consulting or whatever. I just want to like, you know, there's a lot of really valuable information that new and struggling and prosperous small farmers are asking me and we're talking about that I think would be really valuable information for y'all. But obviously I can't release that call or those calls, any of them, without privacy clearances from them. So that's what else I'm working on, but no promises there. Point is, I'm just trying to bring more people on the fucking podcast to teach y'all as much as I can. So, hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I know it was a long one. It's like an hour and a half or something, but, you know, go to the gym, go fucking run, go walk. If you got a shitty knee like me, go bike or whatever the fuck. Go plant a bunch of agave. You know what I mean? Go knock out some chores. This shit will go by quick. You'll learn a bunch of stuff. Should have put that at the beginning, not at the end. Whatever. I'm not a podcaster. I'm a farmer. I'm just trying to teach y'all a little bit. Anyways, have a great rest of the day. Rest of the day. It's fucking 2:41 in the morning. Sorry. It's not rest of the day. Rest of the day. It's 2:41 in the morning, man. Okay, so y'all have a great start to the day. And I'll catch y'all at another time. Yeah, have a good one. And keep on farming agave and cactus, y'all. Peace.